Okay, we're back again for day two. Habari Gani. It is nearing the end of Kwanzaa. At this point, we only have a couple days left after today. And we have a very special guest today joining us, author of over 10 books, I believe, at this point. Scholar, linguist, has done tours going to Kemet, so many amazing things. And he has come to share with us today on three very important topics. First, we'll be delving into African and African American history and understanding that, for homeschoolers. Afterwards, we'll go into culturally relevant teaching methods, specifically African centered teaching methods, and then going into an introduction to African languages for homeschoolers. So, really exciting roster of events here. We'll take a 15-minute break in between each topic. So, let's go ahead and get started. Everybody, get your minds and hearts ready to receive from scholar and linguist Asar Imhotep.
Yay! You need a crowd uh, voice,
Right,
the sound of
absolutely.
the roaring, and
Like,
to get it
woo, sound effects.
going. Well, Moyo, that is Chiluba for greetings and welcome. And it is also the word for heart and life. So when we're greeting each other, we are, exchanging life forces and life entities. So Moyo to each and every one of you in the Whole Life Academy uh, stream, as well as the extended family who was just learning about this great institution via the social media platforms. And so today I'm going to be speaking in this first hour on give kind of just like an intro to Black studies for homeschoolers, and to kind of give some idea of some possible approaches and the function of Africana history for uh, students coming up in the modern age and for the future. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing my screen, and you will have to click it to make it come up public once it shows up on your screen. There we go. And so now I'm going to go here from the beginning. And so now I kind of retitled it Intro to Africology for Homeschoolers, and we'll see why in a little bit. But I want to kind of give some insight into Black studies in terms of its purpose, and then go into Africology more specifically. So this is Dr. Nathan Hare, and in an article that he wrote titled Questions and Answers About Black Studies, he states that the main motivation of Black studies is to entice Black students to greater involvement in the educational process. Black studies is, above all, a pedagogical device. So one of the goals of Black studies is to help Black students better engage in their general studies. And so if they can see themselves in the curriculum, they'll be more apt to pay attention, to be more involved and active. And of course, in the final analysis, we also want them to learn, to ingest, to internalize this information, and that this information that they grasp from Black studies is used as a tool in their everyday life. And so this is what he essentially states here. And then we have the late Vivian V. Gordon in her article titled The Coming of Age of Black Studies. And she states that the curriculum of Black Studies must help the student develop his or her skills in the use of the tools which are important to both a critical analysis of interaction of the past, present, and to the student's future participation in the analyses of factors which affect the life of Black people in America. So, along the same lines as Dr. Hare, but with more insight in terms of understanding the past, how it relates to their present, and how will they use this information to shape the future, but not only for themselves, but for the larger Black community. So Black studies is part of a socialization process, a pedagogical instrument to help improve the lives of Black people. And so this is what you get from these citations. And so when it comes to Africology, you'll hear Black studies, Africana studies, more specifically African American studies, and the like. There's just various different names for this particular um, field of studies, but Africology is a bit more specific. And so when we talk about Africology, we're talking about the Afrocentric examination of phenomena related to African people. So in some instances, Black studies, people will lump anything into Black studies if they're just talking about Black people. And it can come from any type of perspective, uh, absent of the Africans, the people, the Black people themselves. And so what Africology does, as it is, Afrocentric in its orientation, it centers the African, the Black person in their story, in their narrative, as subjects of the discipline and not objects or something on the peripheral in somebody else's larger discourse. And so I'll skip down to the bottom where I have it bolded in red. As a subject matter discipline, Africology entails normative and empirical inquiry and discourse concerning the life histories and life prospects of peoples of primary African origin and their descent transgenerationally, transmillennially, and universally. So not only in terms of the continental Africans, but the Africans that you find, of course, in the United States, in Brazil, in Colombia, in the Middle East, in Europe, what we would largely call the diaspora, right? So all of that encompasses Africana studies or Africology, more specifically. So to give an Africological perspective, when we talk about, for example, Jackie Robinson, in general Black studies, they will say that Jackie Robinson was the first to integrate Major League Baseball. And they start from the point in which he enters Major League Baseball, and they will shape the narrative to state that, this was a big opportunity for Blacks in the United States because of the rich and heavy segregation that was going on at the time. And, they go from there. So it kind of centers, even though we're talking about a Black individual and a person of African descent in the United States, the story of Jackie Robinson tends to center Europeans and their benevolence and them coming up into accepting Black people in the Major League Baseball. But from an Afrocentric perspective, this is the wrong way to approach the narrative of Jackie Robinson. So in order to understand Jackie Robinson, you have to understand, of course, segregation, enslavement, and what led up to it in terms of Jim Crow and the like. But you have to talk about the Negro Leagues, right? And so from an Afrocentric perspective, the question isn't about, blacks being now able to participate in the Major League Baseball uh, league, whatever, uh, and them having opportunities to work and live amongst Europeans in this sense, but more so Jackie Robinson more so relates to the destruction of the Negro Leagues. Why I say that? So because of segregation, black people had to create their own league because they couldn't participate in the major leagues. So this is why we created the Negro Leagues, which was founded in 1920. So because they segregated everything, and excuse the noise that you hear in the background, because they segregated everything, you know, black people had to make their own uniforms. They had to create their own parks. They made their own instruments. They had their own tour buses. The Negro Leagues was a center and a marketplace for other businesses. So, any kind of merchants would come to the Negro Baseball League. And of course, this is where all the talent was, right? So when you think about the the role of Jackie Robinson, it wasn't that European people were benevolent. They saw all the money and all the concentration and the institution building that the black people were doing. And they knew that there was a large segment of them that if they had the opportunity to live and exist amongst white folks, that they would leave their own communities behind. So when we had the Negro Leagues, we had the opportunity to build our own leagues, which would have, if they would have stayed um, in existence, in a very real way, would have blown up to something major in the year 2023, 2024, right? And so from an Afrocentric perspective, we look at this from the argument of the black people who lived this. And so what the entrance of Jackie Robinson started the beginning of the destruction of black owned businesses in this way. And so this is one of the way in which they were sabotaged. So they'll try to like buy you out, or they'll try to destroy, because the Negro Leagues were a competing league, right? So it puts a whole different perspective and spin on the narrative. And, this is the importance of Africana studies, or Africology in particular. So even when we start talking about Africana studies, a lot of folks would have it to where you would start from slavery, as if slavery is the beginning of Black history for us. And that is not the case. Our history is the history of human beings, period. And so you would have to, when you start Africology, when you start Africana studies, you have to go via a paleo anthropological route, right? And so like here's on the screen is a cover of a Nature journal, and it talks about Homo sapiens and their African origins in Ethiopia. So, if we're talking about the evolution of our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, and African folks in general, this is where you start, right? And so this is a reconstruction of a fossil of Homo sapien Idaltu, which was which they dated to 160,000 years ago in Ethiopia. So it's generally argued that probably around where Ethiopia is in the Great Lakes region is where Homo sapiens sapiens, modern humans, initially evolved, and then from there spread around the continent, and as well as the rest of the world, right? So this conversation, places the African, and not only in terms of the center of African consciousness, of African history, but of human history itself. Because, understanding this helps to shed light on certain events, but you always have to start from the beginning. So the beginning of Africana studies is the beginning of human history itself, right? And here's just a kind of a chart of, the early hominids and the evolution going all the way to, the Homo sapiens, which we are right here, and the other species of hominid that existed but have died out throughout time, right? And so when you have that perspective, then you can start analyzing, for example, African kingdoms throughout times and African migrations, because all of this becomes important before we even get to the transatlantic slave holocaust. And we can talk about the languages of African people, the kingdoms, certain conflicts that led to certain events in history, certain interactions, certain rituals and customs that the ancients had that we still have to this date in some form. African influence in non-African communities and the like, trade, shipbuilding technologies, the whole gamut. So, going all the way to the beginning, forces you to examine Africa in these particular contexts. So, as a homeschooler, depending upon what age of the students that you are teaching, you can start off with, basic geography drills, right? And minus the modern day borders, because now you have to talk about the 1884, 1885 Berlin Conference, where, Europeans created borders across Africa for their own political and exploitative gains, right? But prior to that, you can show the ancient borders, of ethnic groups and the like, and you can have them to draw those different things and to put things in perspective and start giving the indigenous names, if for these regions and for these people, and contrast them with the colonial names, right? Like, we say South Africa, like this is South Africa, but that's not South Africa. South Africa is not an African label, right? So there's a dynamic and a power relationship for which you can discuss. And how did they get the name South Africa? What do the indigenous people call this area now, right? And so the importance of the language aspect of this would be the subject for I believe the next conversation that we're going to have today. So, in this context of, Africology and Africana studies, we use our own models in order to teach, right? And in Africa, throughout Africa, you will find that there is there's some kind of a loud noise. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but I'll just wait till it passes. So I'm at a library, ironically. But however, what you see here on the right is the cosmogram coming out of the Congo, and it is representing kind of time and space as a circular, activity. So all across Africa, you will find that time is more viewed in a circular fashion. So from this concept here, this is supposed to represent the sun moving around the earth. So if you see this diagram here and you see these circles, this is representative of the sun, which is also representative of the human being as a living sun. And so at the bottom of this circle here represents kind of under the earth, but the realm of ancestry and the like. But this is the womb. This is the place of the beginnings. So this is stage one of the evolutionary process. And then in V2 here, we have the birth stage. So this is the beginning outside of the conceptualization stage, the birth stage. And so there is living people, excuse me, you're growing and living and becoming mature and adulting here at noontime. And then this segment here represents you going, getting older, and then dying. But this not only represents just human life, but the processes of life in general, right? So there's this conceptualization, the beginning, maturation, and the ending. It's a continuous cycle in life. So when you study events in history, this cosmogram can serve as a model for four fundamental questions that you would have to ask in terms of that particular history. What is this beginning, or what? How was it conceived? What was the events leading up to it? How did it begin? How was it when it matured? And what were the processes for its decline and ultimate death and change? And how is it manifesting now in modern times? So it's a continuous cycle and a circle. So, keep this grapheme in mind, especially in the later discussions that we're going to have, because it's going to become important. And so one way in which I use this is for when I'm teaching, I always ask these four fundamental questions, because this is ultimately what Africana Studies is supposed to teach, or supposed to relate to. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? And what must I do to fulfill that purpose? Right? And other ways that you can say that is who I be, where have I been, who and what am I becoming, and what must be done. Right? So you can see I'm using this cosmogram to convey something. So one of the things that I always do is I always try to break things in cycles, and in always having 4 points of something, because throughout the teachings, whatever the subject matter it is, it'll be easy for them to remember things in 4, right? Which is one of the reasons why I like when they ask you to put your PIN number in, they always give you a choice of 4, because we can always remember a 4 versus a 10-digit PIN number, and the like, right? But in this context, when we're talking about the student and their being, you have to help the student to understand who they are. Where did I come from? What is my purpose, and what must I do to fulfill that purpose? And so that's what Africana Studies should help them to do. And so part of that question, for example, of who am I, in an African American context, we have certain collective characteristics that are shared amongst us. And one of our great psychologists, Dr. Wade Nobles, in an article titled Utilizing Culture in the Achievement of Educational Excellence for African American Adults, from Cultural Precepts to Reoccurring Themes, he reinforces this notion that although African Americans differ on many levels, there is a cultural substratum that unites African Americans on a fundamental level. And it is these practices and perspectives that, when composited together, create the African American worldview. So who am I? Where do I come from? This from a collective standpoint, this has already been done. And so I really recommend that you find that article and read it. And so there's more to this in terms of its description, but I'm just going to give you the cultural precepts. So there's 8 cultural precepts and 9 reoccurring themes. So The cultural precepts are consubstantiation or consubstantiation. This meaning that this worldview that we belong to the same substance. There's a common substance and sameness, between reality itself, existence, and who we are. In terms of, and this is why we, all the males call each other brother, all the sisters call it, or the women call each other sisters, because we come from the same womb. We're a collective in that sense. And then there's interdependence, and then egalitarianism. Everything should be equal. Collectivism, transformation. We're always inventing something. It's always something new, always transforming things. Hip hop culture and language is a testament to that, right? Cooperation, humanness, right? And then synergism. We're always trying to link things and that have kind of the same synergy, right? Or kind of have the same energy or vibration, as we say. We always trying to link things. We're always more so looking for the commonality more so than the difference between things, right? And so these are the cultural precepts. And then there's the reoccurring themes that you find when you closely examine African American experience and worldview. So there's this great sense of spirituality, of course, resilience, as our survival through the transatlantic slave Holocaust and Jim Crow and the like, and the crack epidemic, consistently, surfaces. This humanism. We're always grounding the world, the moral compass for whatever it means to be human, and challenging those when they disrespect our humanity. Communalism, orality, and verbal expressiveness. So, we can't just be dry and be like, and the other day I just went down the block. There's always energy, there's always vitality in everything that we do, right? And so there's a lot of emphasis on the oral tradition and the oral word, which is why like our churches are different, right? Our songs, even the way we express ourselves in our songs, even just our common slang and language, it has to have a certain type of energy, it has to have a certain type of vitality. And this vitality is what I call ashe, that the Yoruba term ashe, which deals with power and command, right? Personal style and uniqueness. That African American folks and just African people in general set the tone for what is hip, what is stylish, and they're always looking at our trends to see what is happening now, right? Our sense of realness. We always gotta, we value keeping it real. We don't like forked tongues and people trying to speak too much in fluffy language and metaphors, right? Unless it's in a hip hop song, you got to be done in a creative way in the context of arts. Emotional vitality, musicality, and rhythm, right? Like these are common themes that you find. And so when you're helping your student to understand the value in Africana studies, what you as a teacher have to be able to provide are examples. For example, especially if you're teaching African American students in particular, of course, each group will have their own set of attributes and things that if you're teaching, if you're in Nigeria and teaching a Yoruba, what makes a Yoruba, and you got to find those examples in history and things to show them this is how we express these reoccurring themes and these cultural precepts, right? And so this gives you an outline of and a homework assignment to find those unique experiences that reinforce these ideas that were accumulated by Dr. Wade Nobles. And so, another aspect of that, who am I, where did I come from, and what is my purpose? You have the individual purpose, and then you have the collective purpose. And so, you'll be doing a lot of cultural studies. And so, another one of our famous psychologists, the late Dr. Amos Wilson, he wrote a thick book titled The Blueprint for Black Power: Moral, Political, and Economic Imperative for the 21st Century. And so when talking about culture, he says that culture constructs definitions, meanings, and purposes. These cultural constructs are used to proactively and reactively mold the mind, body, spirit, and behavior. And so this is part of the aim, as was stated at the beginning of our lecture, is that Africana studies gives direction, and it helps to give the student a sense of purpose, because of our history and what has happened to us. There is a lot that needs to be done, and the way that you shape the attitudes, their interests, their taste, and values, is with the reinforcement in the study of Africology, African studies, Africana studies, and the like. And so they can see themselves in the history, and they can see themselves as subjects and agents, of reality, and as someone that can shape the world into a better future. And so what essentially you are doing is to reinforce and to shape the culture. That's what we do as educators, whether we are at a institution, a public institution, a private institution, or whether we're homeschooling. Because the first real institution is the family. And so if you're homeschooling, and you're homeschooling your children in particular, you can include, because part of that circle of, where did I come from, you would have to give them some history about their parents, their parents, their parents' parents, on both sides of the family, cousins, and things of this nature. Bring that knowledge of family into the discourse, and how they have contributed and or have been affected by history and the like, and to see what visions that the family has had for its members, and then contrast that with the ancestral vision and the collective vision of the people, right? And so they can see what has been done in the family, be inspired by the family, and develop them to work and do great things as well, right? So this is Dr. Kaikosa Kajangu, and his PhD dissertation is titled Beyond the Colonial Gaze: Reconstructing African Wisdom Traditions. And he states in the text that the ancestral vision is a vivid expression that describes why a particular community of memory exists and what types of human beings it intends to deliver. It expresses the feelings that members of the community of memory hold for their community and its place in the world. Often, this vision is the name that the community gives itself. And so, what I want to talk about here is this notion that your culture has a certain type of human being in mind, an ideal human being, right? So, when we're teaching, part of the pedagogical process is to help shape and mold the minds of young children to be the types of human beings the culture needs to thrive. So you're not, as an educator, you're not teaching children so that they can get a job per se, right? You're teaching children to help them to discover who they are and what gifts they possess, and to be able to 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 plant them in the community so that the community can thrive based upon the information that you have imparted upon them, and their and with the sharings of their gifts. And so the community may need more doctors, it may need more engineers, but it also may need more creative folks, right? But regardless of any occupation that the community needs, every single human needs to be somebody of wisdom and of great integrity. And so the ideal human being is going to be somebody of great knowledge, of great respect, of great wisdom, and someone who is of great integrity. So that means they do what they're going to they say what they mean, they can be reliable and counted on, and they will be productive and be willing to share, whether it's in terms of financial resources or just knowledge, you know. And so they're not a hoarder, they're not an exploiter, and the like. So the culture, you know, defines what is the ideal human being and what type of human being that the culture needs to thrive. And but you are like the first part of that process when you are educating your children and the extended community, the extended family and their children, right? Because we all have to live in this space together. And so the better we are at being the pillars in the community, we become models and examples and inspirations, you know, for the generations behind us, right? And so, you know, when it comes to Africana studies, there are a number of questions. And so, you know, kind of leaning on the back one, the last slide. So when we're talking about critical research questions is, you know, what kind of culture must we possess in order to defeat, you know, European white supremacy, any kind of exploitation, you know, coming to Black people, right? Whether it's Asian, you know, wherever the issue is coming from, what kind of culture do you create to be able to fight off exploitation and the like? So these are the kinds of questions that you have to ask as a researcher and as a teacher, because that's what you're going to impart on the children, right? And so what characteristics must a person possess to be the personification of an ideal African human being? So as I stated, your culture tells you, you know, what type of human being is needed for the culture to thrive, right? But you have to be able to write down, what does an ideal human being look like? What kind of characteristics do they possess? Right. And so what kind of human beings must the culture develop to defend against slavery and exploitation? So, you know, the slavery issue is something big, and we have to impart knowledge on how to be able to fight against these systems that seek to further exploit us or to or to diminish, you know, our light. And so in many respects, you know, Africana studies is a martial art, right? It teaches you how to defend yourself. So not only to create and to develop great ideas and technologies and systems and the like in the service of African people, but also to be able to defend that. And so there's always a creation and a defense mechanism that we always have to keep in mind. And so let me know how much time I have.
Yes, you still have 18 minutes.
All righty, cool beans. So, you know, adding on to the discourse on culture that Dr. Amos Wilson presented, you know, I've written some texts and the like dealing with culture, and these are the 5 points of culture that, you know, I want to highlight here. And you can kind of use this to kind of shape your curriculum. And so for me, culture is the institutionalized organization of the physical and social forces of life, so that one, it aids the human person in developing one's own powers of being, right? So uh two, it can provide tools that enable one to tower over life's challenges. Three, it encourages one to celebrate life's beauties. Four, it helps to fertilize one's seeds of greatness. And five, encourages the person to discover new satisfying dimensions of being human in community and at the world at large. And in many respects, these, I believe, should be the goals and are the goals of Africana studies, Black studies, Africology, right? So it's not feel good information. It is valuable information, but with the intent to for it to be used and utilized in the lives of human beings, right? And so uh it reminds me, for example, of this inscription from Antef, a 12th dynasty pharaoh of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. And when we're talking about a philosopher, that word philosophy comes from a word sophos, or Sophia, meaning wisdom. And that word actually comes from ancient Egypt, from this word seba, which means, wise and clever, and Sibau, meaning helmsman, leader, or guide, but it's also a teacher, uh, and the like, right? Or a philosopher. And so when we're talking about what is the nature of a philosopher, a great thinker from an ancient Egyptian perspective, it is one whose heart is informed about the things which would be otherwise ignored. The one who is clear sighted when he is in deep into a problem, the one who is moderate in his actions, one who penetrates ancient writings, who is sensible enough to unravel complications, who is really wise, who instructed his own heart, who stays awake at night as he looks for the right path, who surpasses what he accomplished yesterday, who is wiser than a sage, who brought himself to wisdom, who asks for advice and sees to it that he is asked for advice. And I share this here because this is an example of how the culture presents an ideal human being within the framework of that culture. And so for the ancient Egyptians, an ideal human being was a sophos, a seba, and one who has these particular characteristics. And I don't think this any different than, the goals of modern Africana studies today. And so these are the kinds of expectations or the end goal of what we want to be the embodiment of each student that we teach. And so for you as a teacher, you have to think about this outcome and to think about paths leading to that outcome, right? So uh wanted to get a little bit on Afrocentricity. And so, here's a book here, but I may cut this part short, but I'll read this. So that this is a text in the Encyclopedia Back Studies, edited by Dr. Malefe Kitty Asante and Dr. Ama Mazama out here in Philadelphia. And so, Afrocentricity deals with the placing of African ideas at the center of any analysis that involves African culture and behavior, as well as asking crucial cultural questions in categories such as location, place, and stance. Afrocentricity allows dislocated Africans, that is, Africans moved off their cultural territory and who have imperial relationship with African cultural theory and traditions, to relocate, return to, and reclaim their long denied humanity, history, and heritage. Now, when we word it like this, it becomes very kind of academic in scope. But again, we're looking at what are our objectives, what are our goals, And you will create curriculum, you will create processes depending upon the age of the student to kind of facilitate and put them on a path towards these types of realizations, right? And so, but when it comes to Black studies and African-centered education, at the core of it, one part of the ancestral vision is for us to build a robust nation amongst ourselves, even if it's a nation within a nation, right? And so um, I'm drawing from this text here, Nation Building, Theory and Practice in African-Centered Education by Kwame Agaye Akoto. And in it, uh, he talks about African-centered thematic inventory. Again, with the recurrent themes and nationalist Pan-African theories of liberation and the philosophical foundation of the African-centered curriculum. And he also breaks it down into curriculum domains, which provide the basis for the organization of the subject matter within a prototypical African-centered curriculum. So if you're trying to develop courses for your students and for your children, consider Akoto's breakdown, and you will make adjustments as need be. So there are the curriculum domains, right? So there's the cultural ideological front. And so this deals with the culture, ideas and philosophy studies, and of course, dealing with arts and creativity. Then there's the spiritual psychoaffective. So we're talking about self-knowledge, ethics, morality, and the like. And so you can link, for example, indigenous African concepts of ethics and morality, such as Ma'at or Lungu, coming out of Congo and Zulu traditions, right? Iwa Pele coming out of Yoruba, and what we would call here in the United States home training, right? What are those ethics? What are those moral expectations that you should have gotten at home, right? All of that will be incorporated in these curriculum domains. And so one way in which we can show, the Africana studies as a living tradition. So we're in the middle of Kwanzaa right now in terms of the official holiday. However, once Kwanzaa, the holiday, is gone, the kind of the discussion centered around the 7 principles of Kwanzaa kind of dies down outside of particular, institutions and social domains. Well, this can change if we just simply rename the days of the week, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, right? And so, Sunday would be Umoja, Monday would be Kujichagulia, Ujima would be Tuesday, Wednesday would be Ujamaa, cooperative economics, Thursday, Nia, purpose, Friday, Kuumba, creativity, and today would be Imani, faith, Saturday, right? And you can create activities centered around each one of these particular principles for during the week. You can assign homework or kind of activities centered around these themes. This is a way that you keep Africana studies as a living tradition, and it's something that is reinforced in the lives of your students on a weekly basis, because now they see themselves in time and space itself, right? You can start, linking certain ideas in for example, in the creative domain, in terms of that curriculum. Like, many people don't know that jazz, started in New Orleans, and that, Black people are the inventors of certain instruments, or the way that we use instruments, right? So like when you think about the modern drum set, for example, it wasn't set up that way. Like when you see a drum set and you see the whole, like you watching at a church band, or you go to a concert or whatnot, it wasn't arranged like that. you only had these separate drums, and it required, these are part of the marching bands and stuff like this. Well, this individual here that you see on the left, he is the one who created the modern drum set, and in also with the kick drum, or the kickstand that you see here that hits the bass. And his name is D.D. Chandler, right? And this was this photo here is of the Jean Robuchon or Robuchon Orchestra of New Orleans in 1896, right? And from the article that I got it from, it says, take the drum set. It's fair to say that the current collection of instruments that we think of as the drums would not have come together in quite that particular way without the influence of New Orleans culture at the beginning of the 20th century. So you can have a discussion about, if you're talking about slavery on one hand, but at the same time, you can link Congo Square and the marketplace that was, as well as the musical traditions that was birthed out of Congo Square in New Orleans, and its relationship to Congo culture and the like. There's just so many ways that we can play this. So continuing in the curriculum domain. So then you have the social, political, and economic domain. So there's the political economy, cognition and inquiry, psychology, technology, mathematics, science, the sciences, and computer science, right? All of that is part of Africana studies. Curriculum domains. Number 4, technology, of course, which would include mathematics, science, computer science, functional skills, right? And so you can bring it back full circle in terms of the origin of mathematics in Africa, going back to the Ashango bone, going up to ancient Egypt, and then we can go into the religious traditions, for example, like Ifa and the binary systems there, and how all of that ties into the creation of the computer coding languages, right? All this can be included in the Africana Studies domain, because, of course, we're at the center of all of that. And then, of course, all in the function, lastly, in terms of nation building, the practical applications. So career development, apprenticeships, research theory and practicums, community development projects, organizational experiences. Like, all of that is important. And so what I'll end on this is particular texts that I would recommend for those who are interested, not only in self-study, but if they are teaching their family, even if it's not wholly a homeschooling situation, but especially if you are homeschoolers, right? And you're trying to incorporate Black studies topics and curriculums. So this Encyclopedia of Black Studies, which I mentioned earlier, this is more so to kind of get a feel of defining concepts in Black studies, right? This is more so for the educator of Black studies, more so than a student. But the handbook of Black studies, this will have more of the subject matter that you can incorporate in your curriculums. So the Encyclopedia of Black Studies will give you the idea and a lot of the theory, but the handbook of Black Studies will give you the actual history and subject matter broken down in digestible chunks, of course, with good colorful photos and the like, going all the way from the beginning of human history all the way to modern times, as we can see from the cover. So Molefe Kete Asante is a part of both of these, but the editor, he's editor of both of these, as well as Amma Muzama and Dr. Malana Karega, right? This is a good book that I recommend, Africanisms in American Culture, edited by Joseph E. Holloway, which you see right here. And it's a number of articles by many different researchers who are showing the cultural continuity in the Americas that are grounded in African cultures. And so this gives us our unique African American culture, right? And they kind of expanded a little bit, and so you might get some discourse in South American culture. So those of you who are in South America, as well. So this is a good text that I highly recommend, even if you aren't, have any intent on doing any kind of homeschooling, right? Then you have African-centered pedagogy, developing schools of achievement for African American children, African-centered schooling in theory and practice, the book in the center, and then the healing power of education, Afrocentric pedagogy as a tool for restoration and liberation. And so we'll be getting on pedagogy a little later, but I wanted to give these particular texts on different strategies and issues that that researchers have dealt with when trying to teach or trying to create experiences and curriculums, teaching Black students, right? And then, of course, there's the Afrocentric School, a Blueprint by Dr. Na Dove. This is a more recent publication. And then again with Malefe Kiti Asante, Revolutionary Pedagogy, a primer for teachers of Black children. You can get a lot of text by Kunjufu, Dr. Kunjufu, who's written a lot of text as well. And then, we have the text lastly, from the University of Kemet Press. And, they have a whole bunch of texts that you can, use, that you can actually kind of see here. But these are important here in terms of teaching teams, research teams. So you would create these research teams and study groups, but research teams, so you can create your own curriculums. And so that's when you're creating teaching teams. This will be perfect for homeschoolers, that y'all can link up together and y'all divide the research project, no more than 4, at the most 5 of y'all together, and y'all create a curriculum for which y'all share, right? And so what is all involved in that process? And then, of course, if you're trying to go the full gamut and create a K through 12 experience, this is the book for you: African K through 12, African Science and Culture Schools. And so both the authors, Dr. Taka and Ife, are both educators and have run schools, even been heads of universities in the past. So, these are just some good texts. And so with that, I end this presentation, and I don't know how much time I have left, or if I'm right on time. Who knows? Y'all let me know.
Yes, it's 2:01 p.m. So if you want to take that 14-minute break, then now would be the time. Or if anyone has any questions, if you could put them in the comments, then we can introduce them here. Does anyone have any questions they wanted to ask? Any questions, please put them in the comments.
It'll be a delay from when they hear you and when you say something. But
okay. So I don't see any questions at this time. So for those who are watching, we are going to break for about 14 minutes and then come back at the 15-minute mark.
So,
someone just asked a question: would it be wise to have a centralized curriculum?
I believe so, or at least a standard curriculum. That can be adjusted, and I'm assuming that this has happened before, but that's kind of the issue of Black people being scattered everywhere across the United States and not part of the same network. But that's something that really just needs to happen. Just needs to be like you have the Common Core, so to speak, in the like the public school system. we need to have our common core. And you know but there'll be certain things that of course you would want to adjust depending on where you're at, and with local. So I believe that there should be a common outline and blueprint, and that can be utilized and then adjusted locally with everybody, and we just create a standards by like a homeschool standards body, right? And so this will be the premier organization for when people are looking to get uh, information on for teaching Black kids in a homeschool setting. This is where they go. And I know there's kind of micro variants of that in certain regions and the like, but this is definitely something that can be done and should be done.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and brother Asar, someone else asked a question. I'm not sure if you addressed it yet.
All
Can we
right.
also say, well, there's one before that. What about convening a conference to standardize Africology?
Well, I think that's kind of happened already, which is why those texts exist. Um, but as far as, and that's something I would probably have to ask Dr. Amo Mazama or Dr. Asante, if there is like a central site, like .com, because there's like an Africology. I think I'm gonna deal with that. Or .edu or something like that. I think I'll do that. I don't think it exists just yet outside of the official text, um, but that's something that they're constantly always thinking of. And then of course you have, for example, your NCBS, National Council of Black Studies, and then you have like the Sheikh Anta Diop conferences. So there's conferences that happen every year, but I don't know if there was a central conference where like that was the objective, to have like a standard curriculum, because Africana studies encompasses so much, like so that do
Okay, and we are back.
I may have to double up on just in case, because this connection has been acting funny all day. Um,
Well, that's
so
okay. Life happens. The
uh,
next question from Dexter Martin was, can we also say such a network could be the same network for our political and cultural themes and aims?
um, I'm not a fan of having a one organization fits all. I think that needs to be a separate organization, but it needs to be in conversation with, um, like if we was to create one for the educational curriculum, like you can create different organizations, because that's a lot for one organization to handle, and you'll have, but you'll need to because from that domain is where you're going to get all the people to do the political work, right, and economic work. And so it's the grounding in the Black studies, Africana studies, Africology education that we want people to enter into these particular spaces. And so the depending on the political and economic sense, you don't want that to necessarily kind of taint the educational wing, because it needs to be an entity unto itself. And so, but they need to be in conversation and communication, so that we always know what the current needs of the people are, so we can shape the educational landscape along those lines.
Okay, the next
And
question is, could we create our education process? Oh, sorry, before that, there's Omari, Brother Omari. How can we incorporate modern natural and physical sciences? How could the Ogun concept of energy and electricity be integrated into scientific terminology?
that's a whole conversation in itself, and I debated including the Ogun discussion. So, and Ogun is an acronym for the observation or the organization of God, universe, and nature. And so of course, we know the Ogun as the deity of the Yoruba, who is a deity of technology, and ironworking and the like. Um, but it would be too much to explain in the little time that we had. So, but again, that's the whole point of the God aspect of the Ogun, because we're dealing with the God segment has to deal with the human relations, the human cultures, the human religion, the human ethics, the human psyche and worldview, as well as the political and historical aspects of the people, of the community, of the Africans itself. So that always grounds you into um, how to utilize the technologies. You can't just create technologies for technology's sake. What is your relationship to the technology? How is it going to be utilized? What are the limitations of it, and what are the ethical and moral implications of the use of such technologies in relationship to nature itself, the environment, as well as the human and social aspect of it. So all that is encompassed within the Ogun framework. Um, and so how to utilize it is well, what's the question? What needs to be done? Right, or what ideas, because for example, if you're talking about electricity, there's places in Africa, of course, that has a hard time keeping electricity on and steady. So how can we create better grids on the African continent so that energy access is more reliable on a consistent basis? Or how can we utilize more natural processes for generating electricity? Do we live close to a river? Can we use the motion of the river to turn some turbines and create an electric field that creates, of course, electricity that could be stored and utilized in the home? So can we do this on a micro level, just for your home, how to build that? And then how do you do that and scale it for whole blocks and whole cities at a time? So that's a large discussion, but it has to be um, within that context.
And
Let's see.
then the last question, were there two more questions? Could we create our education process before or after the grade school, disparate from the general education system? I
The
think they
hold
meant
on.
to
Could we
write
create our
separate. I
education?
think that was a typo, and they meant to write separate from the general education system.
Could we create our educational process before or after the grade school separate from the yeah, I don't know really I don't, even if we use the word separate, I still don't understand the question. Um,
I think they're saying that would we be able to create more of an African centered or Afrocentric education process that takes place separate from the general education system? I can take that question, Brother Asar, and just say
Go
that,
ahead.
those schools do exist already. Whole Living Academy is one of those schools that is African centered, that your children can join from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. And you can visit us at wholelivingacademy.com, WHOLE, livingacademy.com, to find more information. In addition, there are many other institutions that provide African centered education all the way through, like Aya Educational Institute, Uhuru Academy, Kamali Academy, Organization for Black Unity in San Antonio, Texas, the Marcus Garvey School, and the list goes on. There are many African centered schools, Afrocentric schools across the country. There are also African centered schools that exist on the continent of Africa, namely the African American Academy, which was founded by Jukum Chamini and Makini Chamini, and they have three very large African centered schools that are on the continent in the countries of Cameroon, Burkina Faso, and South Africa that follow a fully Afrocentric curriculum. So if you look up African American Academy Cameroon, for example, in your internet search, then you can navigate from there to find more information about those schools. And they actually even pay for volunteer teachers to come to their schools from the United States. They would take care of your plane ticket and provide a stipend and everything if you'd like to come and, teach there as an African American teacher. Right now, we don't have African centered colleges that exist. There are African colleges, but those African colleges tend to follow a Eurocentric curriculum. But in terms of an Afrocentric or African centered college, that is not something that currently exists. However, there are plenty of Black studies programs, African studies programs, African American studies programs across the country, and even in other countries, where within those Eurocentric institutions, you can have, a really strong organization that is centered around these same principles of Africology that Brother Asar was discussing.
Indeed. And another thing that has to be discussed as well is the point of funding. And so when you're talking about like the public school system, for example, it it is funded by taxes, from homes, buildings, and the like, from businesses. And so, you know, usually these schools don't have the same access to fundings in terms of African center schools and private schools that a public school, of course, would, because they're garnishing and reallocating tax money. But that is something that has to be discussed one day. Like, what needs to happen is that all of you, very African centered and Black centered folks that have, great thriving businesses and good jobs, we need to all pick a place in the United States and move and buy up and or build a neighborhood to where we can, create a schooling that's funded by our taxes. That's a whole process in itself. and and or do the thing on the continent of Africa. But then of course you can also, because we live in an age of technology, you can create whole institutions online. And matter of fact, that's the one of the books, or the last three books that I showed for the University of Kemet. That's exactly what they're doing. So they set out to create those 30 or 40 something books, and now they're going to the next stage of building a university where you can get uh, degrees, from the University of Kemet, which would be an online university. I know Dr. Malefe Kiti Asante, they were working on that. It started, but something else happened. I don't know what, but they were doing that for the PhD program in African American Studies and Africology, um, and as a separate thing from the one at Temple University. And so, you know, there is either in some degree is happening, um, or they tried it before, and there was some logistic issues, but this is part of the discourse. So we need to figure out, this is why it's important for us to be in these high paying jobs or developing profitable businesses, so that we can invest in certain things like this for our children, coming up. Because a lot of these private schools, like here in Philadelphia, I'll go to certain spaces and you'll see whole Jewish uh, schools, right? Like, how are they funding that independent of, like a public school system? Is that they're not getting tax money from it? Is because all the Jewish people are doing well enough that they can do tuition, and or as part of the cultural investment, they invest and get money donated to it. And they have whole big institutions. It's not like it's not a little house that I see here. This is like buildings, and they have buses and football field and soccer fields and all this other kind of stuff, all Jewish run, right, with Jewish stars and names and all this other kind of stuff. So we have to get there, but it's going to take changing the mindset and the culture of those of us who become the high wage earners, to be able to set aside and invest that money in institutions that we create, such as the kinds that were mentioned already by Sister Nicola, and and others that we can dream up in the future and organize.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for the amazing talk today, Brother Asar. We're getting ready to go into the next talk here on African centered curricular approaches, pedagogy. Would you like to break shortly for a few minutes, or do you want to jump right in to the next talk?
Let's do about, what time is it? 2:21 your time. So let's say exactly at 3:30.
Okay, sounds good. So, everyone, we're
So about
going
9 minutes.
to just keep the stream going, and we will pick back up at the 2:30 Central Time, 3:30 Eastern Time, the 30-minute mark, wherever you are.
Thought we lost our way, thought we lost our sight when they carried my people away to stolen land. But we made it home again. They tried to take my name, tried to take my life when they carried my people away to stolen land. But we made it home again. Look at me, I'm your mother, I'm your sister, that's your brother. Can't be divided no more when you look me in the eye. Reclaim your power and your joy with each tear we cry, and every word we write, and every song we sing. Dance with our feet in the dirt. We on this ancestral scene. That ancestral energy has carried me through the storm. And when I fall in the field and think I can't go on, you got my feet, take my hand. You let me know it's for real. You said it's no room for fear. Just get your purpose fulfilled. No more struggle. No more struggle. No more struggle. We don't have to struggle no more. We just putting in work. Put away the whip, I don't identify as slave. Underestimated like a queen in a cage. I've seen what the stage can clean in a day's work. Lives when the page turn, plight was the wage earned. Trauma don't define my existence. Each and every instance they deny themselves penance. Look up to the future, you can tell me what you see. If you see division, then you can't see me. Cause I'ma take you to the water, I'ma teach you how to fish for honesty and discernment. Just cause they knock don't mean it's meant. Protect your house lest we forget. Just because they knock don't mean it's meant. Protect your house lest we forget. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the world don't see nothing wrong with Africa getting donations, but don't wanna see us get reparations. We should be done. We are the wealth. We hold the keys. We have the health. Child of the sun, future and past. We are the seeds. Can't hold us back. We never lack. These are the facts. Wherever we go, that's where it's at. Already free, already black. Pour a libation, throw it big back. This is my team. Ancestors dream. Strong as the roots, honor the trees. Flow with the wind. Cool as the water, Shango sun, those shoes gutter, past uncharted, road turn on, got snatched away, but we made it home. We got snatched away, but we made it home. We got snatched away, but we made it home.
And welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. We are here with scholar, linguist, author, tour administrator, because now I believe that, you're even administering tours to Kemet and maybe even to other locations, doing so many amazing things. How many books have you written at this point, Brother Asar? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Welcome back, everyone. I believe 8, if I'm not mistaken. So there's
Can't keep up
I got
anymore, huh?
because there's some that I haven't published or there's on the way, so I gotta discount them. I think it's about 8 or
Right,
9.
right. Has written so many amazing books that, mainly go within the field of, Africology, Africana studies, linguistics, even some poetry, I believe, is in there as well. So, a lot of really great things. And today, Brother Star is going to be talking with us about creating culturally relevant curriculum, particularly um, African centered pedagogy, the approach to teaching rather than the curricular portion. So, we're going to jump right into that with Brother Star here whenever you're ready.
Cool beans. Hold on one moment as I share my screen. And this subject here is a very involved subject. So, of course, in the time span that we have here, be able to cover everything. But I just wanted to kind of lean and piggyback on the previous discussion that we had, and you'll see what I mean when you see the graphemes that we're talking about here. But as stated, when most of the texts that I write have to deal, of course, with African culture, religion, spirituality, and history. And one of the tools that I use in that analysis is linguistics. And linguistics in the modern day encompasses so many different fields. But outside of my educational experiences and motivations, I'm also uh, a an active and in training computer scientist, and the field in which I'm involved in what we would call part of the cognitive sciences. And so when we talk about the cognitive sciences, we're talking about an interdisciplinary, and scientific study of the mind and its processes. So you can see this grapheme here that shows the interrelated fields of the cognitive sciences. So if we start on the top right, of course, is linguistics, but then there's also philosophy, and then there's also psychology, and then artificial intelligence, computer science, neuroscience, and anthropology. So if you kind of understand this, you can see why I have such a wide area of not only interest but expertise, because they're all related, even within the domain of Africana studies. And another reason why I'm showing this is because what we have to do is to be able to create diagrams like this to help people to understand how one aspect of Africana studies informs another in terms of its usage and potential. So, for example, if I'm doing historical comparative linguistics and language studies in Africa, of course, we have a situation now where we're trying to, create software using African languages, create keyboards with African scripts, and the like. And to develop, for example, artificial intelligence systems that is built upon, Afrocentric and African related data, right? And then, of course, you can't do linguistics without simultaneously studying psychology and anthropology, right? Like, and of course, you can't study anthropology without studying psychology and neuroscience as well as philosophy. Because when you're studying a people, you're also studying their worldview. Well, what are the terms that they use to articulate aspects of their philosophy and worldview? You would have to know linguistics, and how will we display all of that information and store and categorize and search for the data. That's what this is supposed to be computer science, but artificial intelligence under computer science, right? So it's the interrelatedness of everything. You can't really do one of these things without dabbling in the other. You'll more than likely be an expertise in one or two things, but you'll probably be an expert in one or two things. But you're going to have to be familiar with all of these different things. So it's this kind of thing that when we're talking about the pedagogy, we're teaching children. Andragogy is the teaching of adults, but to me, it should be the same system. It should be a continuous. That's part of the indigenous African process. So what they'll do is they'll teach a particular type of mythology to kids, but when the student becomes a teenager and a young adult, they'll use those same mythologies to give a deeper analysis about reality or something that isn't obvious in the myth. And so we can talk about that a little later as well. But when we're talking about pedagogy, I'm reminded of the discussion, of course, in Blueprint for Black Power, and where we're talking about culture as the basis and the source of power, right? Because ultimately what we're doing when we're teaching young people is for them to be upstanding holders of power. And we always have to have power in the discussion, because it's the power that's going to having the power to be able to utilize Africana studies as a defense mechanism against people that try to exploit your people, right? And so the quote here on page 39 of the text is that at times cultures, societies, and various types of social organizations, which include the educational organizations, may be conceived of as conspiracies. And, in this internet culture, we hate the word conspiracy, but to conspire means to plan, to think out methodically about a course of action, right? And so we can't expect to have great results and great power not having our own conspiracies, our own plans, our own objectives and paths and methods for achieving those objectives, right? And so in that educational process, how we would do it in an indigenous fashion is what this author discusses here. So this is Dr. Alex Tangon. He is of the Dagara people, who lives in northern Ghana. Now, there may be those of you who are more familiar with, for example, the late Dr. Maladoma Some and the late Sobonfu Some, who are also Dagara, but they hail from Burkina Faso. So, I mentioned earlier the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference that split, Africa into the modern states that we have today. But of course, it had no regard for ethnic groups. So that ethnic group is split. One half lives in Burkina Faso, and the other half lives in northern Ghana. So they're right there. But anyway, he is of that group, and he wrote a text on healing, but I interviewed him on my YouTube channel. And so what he states here is from 18 minutes and 40 seconds in the conversation that you can find on my YouTube channel, Asar Imhotep. You'll be able to find it. So just type in his name. And so he says that Daguerre religion is all about the cosmos, the cosmic force, the cosmic energy. Cosmos equals everything that is together. What is on earth and what is not on earth. You need to know and interact with this cosmos. Whatever you do practically to get to know the cosmos, you do it in the form of deity, the form of God, the form of divinity. You give it a personality using one of the forces. So I hope you understand exactly what he's saying here. So what we discuss, and he discusses this in his text as well, is that for the Daguerre in particular and Africans in general, God is existence itself. And for the Daguerre, they split the study of God into two primary domains, what is on earth and what is not on earth. But God is everything and all things at once. So any type of study ultimately is the study of the divine. And so part of the curricular, part of the pedagogical process for teaching is to personify major concepts and forces and make them deities, and to create mythologies and stories centered around these concepts so that it stays in the minds and the memory of the people, right? And so again, when you're talking about Africa, the first step is always to create these mythologies, these stories for which the greater curriculum can be built on once the people get older and they can take on more abstract knowledge, right? And so there's levels to this, but they're all built off of the same fundamental narratives, right? And so, for example, in ancient Kemet, they have this deity by the name of Seshet, and she is the goddess of wisdom, knowledge, writing, really the goddess of science, and which is stated here from this particular wiki article. She has also became identified as the goddess of architecture, astronomy, astrology, building, mathematics, and surveying. These are all professions that relied upon expertise in her skills. So there's no ethereal entity floating around in the universe, that represents, writing, wisdom, and knowledge. These are concepts and ideas and or guilds that are personified as a deity, right? And that word Seshet, comes from, is a variation of these forms of the words that you see here: to know, to be wise, to be aware, clever, to be skilled and experienced in cleverness, to take counsel, to mediate, consider, think about. I think I should have put meditate there. And healing arts, medicine, pathology, and diagnosis. So if you want to convey these ideas, you personify it like they did her, and then you would create stories and narratives where the fundamental essence for which she is personified, is highlighted, and it becomes a tool and an instrument for learning, right? So this is one of the indigenous pedagogical processes. This is what we did. So remember that before the ancient Egyptians, wrote and invented writing, they existed like most people in the world existed, and they conveyed knowledge through the oral tradition. And so, they weren't able to write down whole treaties, like Blueprint for Black Power is like a 900-page book. that had to have been articulated over several years in the oral tradition, which now you can compact in one particular book once writing came along. But the way that we transferred values and information was through ritual, through mythology, stories, songs, artwork. And while this may seem primitive to certain individuals in the world, this is actually still the most effective way to convey information. Because while, of course, a lot of us read and love reading if we want more details, we still rather engage in a conversation, and especially in creative ways about the particular subject matter, so that we can get an overall feel of it. And so as educators and homeschoolers, these are different ways in which you can make the curriculum relevant and exciting and engaging for the young folks. You're going to have to be creative in creating new mythologies and stories, or finding ones that already exist if you truly understand what the names mean and the languages and the like, right? And so, part of that process, remember that, you have to be able to convey the ideas and values in an everyday practical experience. So one of the ways in which I mentioned, keeping the values, for example, of Kwanzaa, is to create a 7-day calendar where we replace Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with Umoja, Kujichakalia, Ujima, Ujamaa, Nia, Kumba, Imani, right? And so one of the ways in which, you can utilize this is to, for example, we should have it to where on Monday, you have to execute every single Monday, you have to execute some process that gets you closer to self-determination, right? Or some kind of self-determining business. So if you have an idea for a business, or to start some project with anything that's self-determining, did you learn another language or whatnot, every Monday is your dedicated day, that if you don't get anything done that week, on Monday, on any other days, on Monday, from 6 to 8 p.m., whatever, I'm strictly working on my own self-determination project, right? So on Tuesdays can be days that we set aside for any kind of like volunteer work, to do something collective with the community, right? Wednesday is, we would say, a market day. Like if you're going to buy something, like we make it a ritual that every Wednesday you have to buy something. If you're going to spend money that week, on Wednesday, you have to buy something from a Black-owned business, purchase a service from a Black-owned business, right? And, Thursday would kind of link into, Monday in terms of self-determination and purpose. Like you have to do something that's in your purpose, right? And Friday, be the day for creativity. You do some artwork, you do some music, you do something, like you just set aside that time, for you and your children, you and your spouse. Like this will be a good date night. That, Fridays are always good date nights, right? Y'all do, so you can go out to a creative event, or you make sure that y'all do something creative yourself, create those memories. Like there's ways that you can utilize the culture to empower yourself and the culture itself. So this is, when we just say Sunday, Monday, Tuesdays, means nothing to us. These aren't our words, these aren't our days, these aren't our deities. Like Thor, for Thor's day, Tuesday is really God's day, right? But here's Sunday And then of course Saturn, like these don't mean anything to us. But Umoja means something. This can be, Sunday we can set aside for community gathering, right? Like we get together, and of course you don't have to follow this strictly every week, but there should be something along those lines somewhere in the Black community, following this every day of the week, 365 days a year, right? So another example is, for those who are more familiar with me, I've been debating and writing on the meaning of the place name Kemet. But out of that research comes a new paradigm and philosophy and practice, which I call Chikab, right? Which is utilizing agriculture and farming to teach life lessons, right? And to also to build economic structures for ourselves, as well as, solve the food crisis, in food deserts and the like. Like this is a whole paradigm. And, one of the texts that I recommend is, for example, Rooted in the Earth, Reclaiming the African American Environmental Heritage, right? So for those of you who are educators, I encourage you to read this text and, find ways to teach about, for example, human relationships via the ritual of growing food in a garden. Like these are creative ways, like pedagogy doesn't have to be in a classroom per se. You can take them out into the garden and you can create whole life lessons about ecology, about human relationships, about respect, about timing, a whole slew of things just by engaging in agriculture activities. And continuing with history, notice the title of this: Reclaiming the African American Environmental Heritage. So you can teach Black history with farming, right? There's just so much that we can do. And so, of course, using graphs, like, for me, it's always the cosmogram. I always use the cosmogram as a basis for articulating subject matter. And I always try to reduce everything to 4. And so y'all already familiar with this from the first conversation that we had an hour ago. This is the cosmogram, and it asks 4 fundamental questions of life. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? And what must I do to fulfill that purpose? And so as educators, as students ourselves, we should be asking this of ourselves, and we should be, discovering a path to answer for ourselves all of these questions. And then as an educator, you are to create the paths for your students to discover these answers for themselves, right? And so it's the same slide, just kind of blown up. I use that kind of same motif to discuss culture, for example. And so, there's Dr. Malana Karenga talks about these kind of 7 areas of culture, which I have further reduced to 4. So you have, for example, ethos. So we're talking about ethics and morality. So this is one aspect of culture and development. Then you have cosmology and mythology. And so this is when you're talking about our relationship to sciences, the nature and the universe, as well as mythology. The way that this is more so dealing with pedagogy. How are we teaching and conveying our history and values and certain other important information in creative and unique ways that resonates in the minds of the people who embody the culture itself, right? And then you have motifs. So, you know, these are the signs and symbols and creative visual aids that help in the instruction, that remind people how to act and what ways to be, and inspires them to exist in a certain type of way for maximum harmony and prosperity in life, right? And then of course history. So you can't, you know, there's no people without a history. And so your culture embodies the historical experiences that that particular population itself has gone through. And so, you know, this is me using the Congo cosmogram to convey these 4 particular areas and intersecting areas of culture, right? So I also use it to teach values, you know, and the word value derives from a Proto-Indo-European word dealing with power, the ability to make and create things, to make things happen. That's how you know that something is valuable, because it facilitates change in a particular direction. And so, you know, part of the instruction is to inform people about their value, and another part of the instructional process is to have the student become valuable. And so when we're talking about Africana studies and Black studies and Africology, it is fundamentally an exercise in making African people valuable, not only, of course, unto themselves, but to the world at large, in a way that is ethical and non-exploitive, right? So, of course, I like to break things down in 4. And so we have, in the V1 position, intrinsic value, and then we have accumulated value, then you have social communal values, and then we have self-defined value. So when we talk about intrinsic value, we are essentially talking about the essential nature or constitution of the human being as spirit, as a spark of spirit. So remember what I said earlier, that in the African worldview in general, God is existence itself. It is everything and all things at once. So the human being is a particular spark of divine. It's like a drop in an infinite sea and ocean with the same constitution. So this is what we mean by consubstantiation, right? We're of the same substance as the universe, as God, you know, if we use English terminology here, right? Because God is the ultimate value, it is the ultimate power. You existing as part of the infinite divine, you too are valuable. You exist, you are born with value. You are born with vitality. You are born with power. You are born with dignity, and you are born with respect. Deserving. That's the very nature of you existing is what constitutes intrinsic value, right? So when we're teaching what it means to be human and why being human and alive is valuable. And even when we're not here, when we leave this earth, you know, what is the value in that historical part of the cultural wheel in terms of ancestors? How can you even be valuable to the community in death, right? Then you have in the V2 the accumulated value. So this is the value one accumulates as a result of the acquisition of knowledge and skills. So this is more direct to for the homeschoolers and the teachers and the parents, right? So you're setting your children up to develop knowledges and skill sets so that they are seen as valuable to the community and the family, because of course the goal is for them to grow up and to start a family of their own. And so, what they learn as a child growing up, the knowledges, the worldview, the skills that they learn is what's going to determine how valuable you are in the marketplace, like to what degree you can take care of your family and expand and leave an inheritance in the life. So this is what we mean. So you have an intrinsic value just you just have because you exist. And then you have accumulated value, which is based upon what you know and what skill sets you possess. Right. And so, this is of course going to fluctuate. But of course, individuals exist within a communal context. And so when we talk about, the individual being a person in community, that community now has a particular value. So this is what we mean by the culture. The culture is the articulation and the organization of the inherent intrinsic values and accumulated values of the individuals which constitute the culture in the community. So the values that the collective corporate community has agreed upon over the years to be the ethos that defines them as a collective, right? So this is what we mean by social and communal values. And then lastly, the self-defined value. So you're going to have to live a little bit and discover who you are, because of course, as parents, as teachers, we have an idea of who you are, and we know to a certain extent of what's important to you and what you're going to need to be able to thrive in this society. But only you can truly answer for yourself who you are and what do you bring that others may not see that is in fact valuable. And so I want to give an example of the last set of value from this text from Dr. Chilemalema Mukinge, titled Muntu wa Nzambi, Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation. And in this text, he's of the Baluba people out of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he's talking about the naming process among the Luba people. And so there's a section in the text where he's talking about the maturity names and initiation names, right? And so I have highlighted here an important statement. He says, in the Luba tradition, when a son becomes of age, he selects for himself a name to be added to the given birth name. Now, of course, when we are born, we inherit a name that our mothers and fathers have given us. And so, in the African tradition, names have meaning. And so it's kind of giving you an idea of who you are. But at this point, after a certain age, it says after he becomes of age and he really kind of understands himself and who he sees himself to be, he then names himself. He adds a name that better reflects who he is or who she is, based on their understanding of themselves or their ideas and goals in life. Right? This is very important when we are talking about, for example, hip hop culture. So there's a lecture of the MC KRS-One, a hip hopper rapper out of the Bronx, who did a lecture at Temple University in 2004. And he's talking about this idea of identity, right? And within of the philosophy of hip hop context. And he's asking, when it talks about, he's talking about Eminem um not being white, and or him not being black, and not necessarily, like, he knows he's a black person, he knows he's a black man, but beyond the racial construct here in America, when we think about what is that, he's asking the question, he's saying that hip hoppers grapple with that concept on the regular. What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be a human being, right? And so he says, what is that? Black, white. What is that really? See, hip hop deals with that. We're not skirting around the issue. What is an African American? What is that? What do we call ourselves? Why are we calling ourselves what we are calling ourselves? That's why the first step in hip hop, change your name. First step. What are you calling yourself? You want to be a hip hopper? First step, change your name. Why? It breaks you off from a history you did not create. And we can see that hip hop is following in the same tradition as the Luba people in Central Africa in terms of naming ourselves. So, my birth name is Harold Johnson. I have a whole bunch of names, but when I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha at the University of Houston in 2002, I was given the name Imhotep, but I added Asar. That's my added initiation name, Asar, Osir, right? And of course, my MC name, because I'm a hip hopper, was D-Mate the Prophet. And D-Mate is a word that I made up, meaning unorthodox. Right. And then I had my poet name being the Black Lotus. Right. Like as hip hoppers, we have this tendency to just we have to give ourselves names, because it's, you couldn't name me, correctly. Right. And so I bring this up because this is a way that you can teach history and culture. Have a session, when you're studying African languages and cultures and whatnot, and you ask your students, if you can name yourself, what would you name yourself and why? And so this is part of the process, right? And so, I use this to, talk about, curriculum in a sense. So you can use it in terms of philosophy, science, art, and purpose. And that's the whole Madu Ndela model, which is a Chiluba Bantu way of saying better nature, the study of nature. So how do we integrate this in a cyclical way? What kind of aspects do we do? So this is what I had before I created the Ogun model, right? And so, helping the student find their purpose. So like we can see this diagram on the left hand side. So it's saying, is when we talk about your purpose, is represented by this green star, it's the intersection of what you love doing, what the world needs, what are you good at, and what you can get paid for. So once you understand all four of these, then you will have discovered your purpose. And so, within that conversation, of course, is passion, your sense of mission, your vocation, and profession. Because we want our students to find a sense or strengthen their sense of purpose in life. Because once you have a purpose, then you'll be able to better endure the challenges that are inevitable in all areas of life. It is the purpose, the understanding of goal and accomplishing those goals that allow you to navigate through the turmoil, the 1001 conflicts of life, right? And so this is, this may be, I don't know if this is my last slide. No, it's not my last slide. But when it comes to the human relational aspect of life, knowing what the community needs, I started looking into male female relationships. And as many of you know, in 2015, I published a book titled Where is the Love? How Language Can Reorient Us Back to Love's Purpose. And, while it is not like an instructional book on how to be and live together, I'm more so examining from a language standpoint and a cultural standpoint what love is, right? But, doing that study, it allowed for me to really kind of evaluate and to look at the crisis that we have, that of course I experienced in my own life, and with my family, in which many of us may have encountered through our lives, dealing with each other. And of course, I'm not a woman, so I don't really speak on women things. Uh, I'm concerned as a man and as a father about the way that us Black men move and navigate in the world. And so there was this constant discussion about submission in a relationship. And these are talking points from Christianity that's really just kind of permeated throughout the blogosphere and the social media sphere. But the question being about, should a woman submit to a man in a relationship and to or at least to her husband in the context of a marriage and the like. And what I found is that really people don't even know what the idea of submission is. And submission has to deal with being under the mission, to submit to the mission. That's literally what the word means. You can go to the online etymological dictionary and you can see how the word has evolved, but that's literally what it means, to submit to the mission. So when a woman is supposed to submit to her husband, he is really only the vehicle, the personification of what the mission is. The problem is a lot of us men are trying to enter into relationships with no mission. We just love the way the sister looks, how she, smells, maybe even how she treats us, all good things. However, if you're going to enter into a marriage, for example, or in a relationship, there has to be a mission, because marriages are cultural institutions, and you are creating an institution that is going to affect the community. And so this has been this is one of the reasons, excuse me, let me back up. This is one of the issues that we have as a result of the transatlantic slave Holocaust, right? It has stripped us of our indigenous understandings of male-female relationships, of community relationships, and knowledge and the like. So, culture is designed to solve human problems. And so one aspect in which I use the Congo Cosmogram as a pedagogical and teaching tool is in this concept of creating a generational plan. And so this is especially for you men and young men who are listening to this, that you need to have, from this moment going forward, to have a 200-year plan, intergenerational plan, right? And I broke it up into four processes. One is dealing with the architecture and self-healing. So this is the this first leg is when we're studying on how to be better people, how to be better men and husbands, and healing from any kind of traumas that may have resulted for just existing in the environment we existed, right? And developing the plan. So that's what we mean by architecture. You're developing the 200-year plan in this process, and you're putting you're doing the necessary steps in to realizing this program. And so this is a plan. Of course, you're not going to live 200 years. You're creating this outline and plan for your family, that your family, this is a relay. So if you understand what these circles mean in this concept of secular time, it is a relay torch, and you're passing the baton off at each segment, right? So the next one is the asset and accumulation and education aspect of the process. So some of these things will overlap, you can do in your lifetime. Others you're going to have to build in the next generations, right? And then the third one is the evaluation of security measures. You know, how do you secure all of this, and discovering ways people can try to come and damage the generational wealth process or aspect of this 200-year plan. And then you have the evaluation and the end of the cycle, and it starts over again. And so you're setting up processes, and we can, you know, have another discussion in full of what the details are of this. But the point is that you're developing a plan for your family. So now when you're looking for a woman, it's more purposeful in the relationship, because you're trying to find someone who has a similar vision and plan. So then, you know, if that discussion is even relevant in the future, now you can really talk about submission. It's submitting to the mission. Do you find a woman who has similar values and has the same vision for family that you do? And of course, there's the compatibility, y'all get along and all other kinds of things. Then y'all can start working together on the mission. And you keep this, and you instruct this. So this is important here, because for those of you who are homeschooling your own children, it is, you know, if you was to adopt something like this conversation starts with them early. So you'll be teaching them about the 200-year plan and the cycle and the plans and or whatnot, and how they can develop and contribute to that in terms of family. And so, you know, it's all interwoven and integrated. But, you know, again, we're visual people. This is something that they can see, and this is part of the pedagogical process. And so I mentioned mythologies earlier. And how much time do I have? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
So this session was supposed to go from 2:15 until 3:15. So you're right around the time. So, you know,
I'll
if you
just
want to
stop
take
here.
your time to go over your points, and
No,
then just let
I
us
kind of
know when
talked
you're ready
about
to break.
mythology already. So that was going to be the end of it. I was just going to get into the details of mythology and the like. But I just want to end with recommending some more books, like Agropolis, the social, political, and
Well, let me
environmental
say this.
dimensions of
Anybody
urban
who has
agriculture.
questions, anyone who has questions, go ahead and start putting your questions into the chat box so that we can see them when Brother Asar finishes his book recommendations. So anyone who has questions, start putting those questions in the chat box, please.
No problem. Agriculture and urban planning, generating livelihoods and food security, land and power, sustainable agriculture and African Americans. You know, a lot of history here, how to utilize land, because of course part of that economic end of the education is buying up land and how to utilize land in very efficient ways. So land and power. And of course, I mentioned the book Rooted in the Earth, Reclaiming the African American Environmental Heritage. And then these series of books, Beyond You and Me, Inspirations and Wisdom for Building Community, Designing Ecological Habits, Creating a Sense of Place, The Song of the Earth, a synthesis of the scientific and spiritual worldviews, and Gaian Economics, Living Well Within Planetary Limits. And, you know, these books have contributions from authors from around the world, not just Africa and the United States, just around the world in general. And so those will be some good texts, some particular interests and strategies on how to implement many of the things that we talked about today. And so I'll end with that so we can go on to the next segment.
Okay, wonderful. So anyone who has questions, go ahead and put them into the comment section now. Any questions, go ahead and put them into the comment section now. Okay, if there are no questions, then we'll come back at the 30-minute mark. Is that okay for you, Brother Asar?
Yes, it is. I'm trying not to be
Okay,
so
everybody,
long.
we'll be back at the 30-minute mark.
All righty. Hotep.
Just keep your head high and your fist up, we gon' shine. Just keep your head high and your fist up, we gon' shine. Just keep your head high and your fist up, we gon' shine. Get up off of your and do something, and do something. Get up off of your and do something, and do something. Get up off of your and do something, and do something. Get up off of your and do something, and do something. Call me a nigga, but it means Nate Goose. A leader for the people, I can never be reduced. Like Pac with a gun in the middle of that juice. But these record companies wanna put me in a noose. Modern day slave in the home of the brave. We just trying to get paid for they put us in the grave. Never been afraid, yeah, they got me in the bag. So I don't give a hell about your Confederate flag. Born in a city where the gritty die young, with a pity by guns to protect themselves. 25 lifers with their hands in the air, horse there screaming out, better check yourself. Like you with the boys in the hood, jumping out the low rider with my house slippers on in the middle of the swap meet, selling vinyl at the backseat, going gold on the street. Let me take you down. Stand for what you believe. Don't let them take your crown. Be stronger, you can achieve. Don't let them take you down. Stand for what you believe. Don't let them take your crown. Don't let them take your crown. Be stronger, you can achieve. Don't let them take you down.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to the Whole Living Academy Kwanzaa Community Workshops. Habaragani, Brother Asar, Habaragani. Oh, you're on mute.
You would think that the person who codes knows how to unmute uh, when it's time to get started, but obviously I can't.
Yes.
Uh,
Can you hear
Morning
me now?
greetings. I can hear you. I can hear you. I was talking and had the mute button uh, pressed, I should say.
Oh, no problem. Yes. So I said Habaragani, Brother Asar.
What's the news? I get confused at
Yes.
Kwanzaa time because I go by my weekly uh Kwanzaa,
Well, today would be Nia purpose, which is really right on time in terms of all of the information that you're sharing today, because it all ties directly into purpose. And
yeah,
in one of the earlier talks, you even went into detail with understanding our purpose and how that connects to um, what we're passionate about and what we're able to make income from. So many jewels here today. So if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch the replay of the earlier talks as well. Now we are going into the final talk for this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are, which is African languages for homeschoolers. But really, even if you're not yet homeschooling, or you haven't made a plan for homeschooling, you can still begin to understand African languages and have a basis for that, to be able to introduce languages other than just what has been pushed upon us through colonialism to our children. We say, okay, we want our children to learn Spanish, to learn French, to learn Mandarin Chinese in order to be globally competitive in the workforce. And Brother Assad, just before you begin, what would you say about that? What would you say about people who say that our children don't need to learn African languages because it doesn't make them globally competitive in the workforce? And you're on mute.
I would say that one is crazy uh, because of what is happening in Africa. One, you know, the idea of Pan-Africanism emerges in the diaspora. And we've decided a long time ago that Kiswahili should be the Pan-African language, right? And there's a lot of issues and things that have been going on over the years with coups, corrupt governments, um, external forces, and the like. And but recent activities is kind of forcing African people to come together. And Sheikh Anta Diop, one of his major texts was Black Africa, an economic and cultural basis for a federated state. And so it has been in the minds of many African scholars to create one African state, right? And it's going to be incumbent upon us of the diaspora to reclaim African languages to be able to communicate with African people, not just on a in a way of, or for the reason of just ancestral memory and for culture, but to be able to communicate and create markets and exchanges with each other. And for example, some of us are moving back to the continent in large numbers, and so it would be incumbent upon them to learn the local languages, or at least one of the major languages. um and then you just have to have, this is where that accumulated values comes in. Like, you become more valuable the more languages you learn, and the whatnot. So if you're able, like, if you intend to like do business in Nigeria, for example, learning Yoruba or Hausa is vital for that process, right? And so then you can really engage the culture and understand what is needed there if you're bringing any goods and services there, and what the markets are like, or uh what can they offer, us or whatnot. So being able to communicate with in the native language will help you to facilitate better those relationships. And outside, and I have a scholarly aspect of that in role, that uh for historical purposes, learning the language and linguistics, and we'll get into a little bit of that in the lecture. But another thing that people don't realize is how much learning languages helps you in other areas. And so we'll get into that in the lecture, so I don't necessarily repeat it. So I'm gonna try to make this one shorter, so we have more time for question and answer if they have it, and we'll get into it. Are you still there?
Yeah, so Brother
Okay.
Asar is just getting ready to jump into the lecture. And again, this is Introduction to African Languages for homeschoolers, but really an introduction to African languages for all of us. I'm sure all of you are learning from home right now. So you get a little bit of experience with, starting to see what it's like, for those homeschooling students. Just like this, students are able to learn with Whole Living Academy in terms of being able to have an interactive session with qualified instructors and receive feedback, ask questions, and be able to grow and socialize together. So please check us out at wholelivingacademy.com, WHOLE livingacademy.com, if you have any children pre-K through 12th grade. And we are going to jump right into the lecture with Brother Asar, African Languages as Sources of Power.
Yeah, I kind of changed the title at last minute, but I wanted to convey this aspect of learning African languages. And we won't be able to go too deep, because when you say African languages, there's thousands of languages. So which African language? I would have to do like a segment on just one language to kind of get a feel for it. So I want to take it in a slightly different direction, but still relevant to the nature of homeschooling, right? And so, as I mentioned before, I am a computer scientist who also studies language and linguistics. And language and linguistics is important for computer sciences because in the modern era, you have, especially a lot of technology that does translations. And, you have to know how to program and to teach the computer how to recognize patterns and anticipate, words in a sentence. Like if you was to ever like type into Google and you type in a word and it kind of anticipates what you're going to type next based upon its experience with users. You kind of see that in Microsoft Word, for example. So, but we're getting to the point where, a lot of African countries are removing the colonial languages as the primary languages of instruction. So, you know, if you can do all of this, for example, in Kiswahili and develop software using Kiswahili terms and a lot in developing keyboards, that those are technology opportunities that come about as a result of learning this particular skill set. And so, but when people think of language, they only think of like what we speak, but they don't understand that mathematics is a language. And by studying other human languages, it helps to better equip you for understanding mathematics, because there's two types of languages. There are formal languages and informal languages. And an informal language is like English, Kiswahili, Yoruba, Spanish, you know, Japanese, etc. These are human languages. But then you have formal languages like the software languages, like if you're talking about .NET or Python, etc., right? Java, you know, these are formal languages, but also mathematics is a language. And so when I define mathematics simply as a formal language that informs us about the relationship between symbols and their ability to aid in the creation of models that allow us to reason about reality, right? And so mathematics, when you see in all these kinds of symbols, there's a grammar and syntax to how you write mathematical formulas. They follow a logical process like all languages do. And so when you're talking about the language of the logic of language, you're just talking about the order, the syntax order of how words must be put together for a speech community to understand each other, right? And so I'm not more so on the language learning side of linguistics, but, you know, because I'm more on the historical, the theoretical side of linguistics. And so, but to help people to understand the nature of linguistics, it is a scientific study of language. It gives us a better understanding of the nature of human language and contributes to our understanding of the human mind, which is why, for example, this, when we talk about the cognitive sciences, notice linguistics connects to neuroscience, psychology, and of course, anthropology. Like all of this works together. And you can see that from this definition here. And so a linguist are scientists who study the general properties of grammars, the universal properties found in all languages, and the specific properties of the grammars of individual languages. So I don't expect any of y'all to be teaching your kids how to do linguistics as a field of study, but it's relevant to this particular topic that we have here. So we have the different branches of linguistics. So sociolinguistics, applied linguistics, computational linguistics, psycholinguistics, stylistics, historical linguistics, and comparative linguistics. And these are often combined into historical comparative linguistics. And this is the area that I primarily am in. So if we're talking about learning the language and teaching language, now you're in applied linguistics in terms of language learning, second language learning, or just fundamental language learning. Like you may have a situation where somebody has a particular type of learning disability, either a learning disability or they have some kind of ailment that prevents them from fully realizing their cognitive abilities. And you're trying to teach them to be able to communicate. So like, you know, people who are special needs or people who have been in accidents and they're trying to relearn how to walk and talk and all of that falls into applied linguistics, right? And so these are the academic areas of linguistics, broken down into theoretical, interdisciplinary linguistics, and applied linguistics. And so applied linguistics here to foreign language education, translation studies, lexicography. So if you're trying to create a dictionary, word list, and all that, translation studies. So this is where it's important. Like if you want to know African languages, say there's books in English that you need to translate into an African language, right? Or vice versa. You know, you having the ability to speak a foreign language allows for you to communicate and to bring about ideas. There's a whole bunch of texts in Africa that are written in the indigenous languages that, you know, need translating into English. Or better yet, we learn, like, let's say that Kiswahili is the main language, that the lingua franca that we all communicate with. So we can take all of these ideas and translate them into Kiswahili and start reading Kiswahili texts, math books, science books, fiction books, mythologies, even linguistic studies, right? All that can be done. And so, you know, the subfields of applied linguistics, first language education, second language education, foreign language education, clinical linguistics, language testing, language at work and in law, workplace communication, language planning, forensic linguistics, literary stylistics, language information and effect, critical discourse analysis, translation and interpretation, information design, lexicography, right? Like, you know, you learning a language isn't just for its own sake. There's value. There's so many things you can do when you learn, you know, 2 or more languages. And that's what I'm trying to convey here, even in terms of the African space. Like, there's so much potential for Africa in general. And those of us in the diaspora are creating markets, you know, to go in between into Africa and the like. So I repeat this here to show that, you know, by understanding language and linguistics, you can enter into other fields very easily. You know, and one book that I recommended, I use for my intro to linguistics course, is African Voices, an introduction to the languages and linguistics of Africa. This is a supplementary text here, an introduction to language, but there's very few texts for learning how to do linguistics using African languages. So this is a good text here, right? So, but why study languages and linguistics? What is linguistics and why study it? This is a screenshot that I have from the University of Arizona. And it tells you, you know, it gives you some ideas on why you should study it if you have these particular issues. But these can be applied to African languages, the study of African languages and linguistics unto itself. So, for example, it says, many people think that a linguist is someone who speaks many languages and works as a language teacher or as an interpreter at the United Nations. In fact, these people are more accurately called polyglots. While many linguists are polyglots, the focus of linguistics is about the structure, use, and psychology of language in general. Linguistics is concerned with the nature of language and communication. It deals both with the study of particular languages and the search for general properties common to all languages or large groups of languages. It includes these other sub areas. I'll skip that for now. But notice here it says, although linguistics is still largely unfamiliar to the educated public, it is a growing and exciting field with an increasingly important impact on other fields as diverse as psychology, philosophy, education, language teaching, sociology, anthropology, computer science, and artificial intelligence. And so I'm saying, if you learn different languages and learn about language in general, you know, these particular fields open up to you. So remember, we always have to have the end mind and goal, because we're helping children to understand their purpose in life and particular paths for being able to achieve their life's objectives. Right. So if you let them know that by learning different languages and studying languages, especially African languages, allows for you to enter into these particular spaces in ways that others cannot. Right. And so you can, you know, if they was to get a BA in linguistics, for example, you know, this could be coupled with a concentration in courses in computer science and obtain a position in a company like Macintosh, IBM, Microsoft, creating computers that would comprehend and produce human languages. And so when we need more people who speak African languages who are also computer savvy and in the computer science fields, so that, you know, we can create our own software in our own languages, our own operating systems, our own, you know, everything, right? But you're going to have to be grounded in the culture of the people, anthropology, language, and of course computer science, and of course the psychology. You know, how do you translate this into experience? You know, there are jobs out there, there are opportunities, career opportunities, business opportunities for individuals who understand the importance of this. You know, another aspect of it from the same website, in talking about if you receive a BA in linguistics, you know, and do graduate coursework, you know, you can also consider getting into law, because understanding the nature of language and the meaning of words and things is very vital and important when doing law, right? A BA in linguistics coupled with courses in computer science, uh, philosophy or psychology, and can go on in the cognitive sciences, as I mentioned earlier, in order to teach at a college or university or to work in the industry on problems involving language and artificial intelligence. You know, artificial intelligence is taking over in many respects. And if we don't have people who understand the nature of languages and how to program in these languages, using both formal and informal languages, then, you know, we're in trouble. So now you can see in many universities, like in Illinois, you have a combined uh, degree program with computer science and linguistics, you know. And so now getting on the African languages part, you kind of got to know how African languages are organized and what they consist of. So, you know, the more popular way of grouping African languages was initially organized by this individual here, Dr. Joseph H. Greenberg. And so you have what they call the Afro-Asiatic languages, Nilo-Saharan, which is in the yellow, and is supposed to be the so-called distribution of these languages that belong to these phylums. Here, you have Niger-Congo A in the red, Niger-Congo B, which is Bantu, and Khoisan in the green, and then Austronesian. This is not an African language, but it's on Africa, because, you know, these people coming from the Melanesian islands moved here. And ancestrally, my mother's line may come from Madagascar or Mozambique. And so the Africans that you find in Malagasy came from Mozambique, and then the Asians that live there from the that speak the Austronesian languages, they came and settled there. So you have a good mix of people right here in this spot. But that's neither here nor there. But that's part of African history. So, you know, these people here who spoke Swahili and Makua and the like, and even some of the Zimbabwean languages, like came from this area, and it ended up in the United States. But African people have been in the process of organizing African languages as well. And, you know, this is our, you know, great scholar, Dr. Theophilo Benga, who is a historian, Egyptologist, and linguist out of the Congo. And he wrote a book here that's in French, but how do we translate this? The Common Origin of Ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and Modern Negro African Languages, right? Introduction to African Historical Linguistics. So, and so he's also the creator of the Review Unc, or the Journal Unc, that you can find online. You can purchase certain books from there and get it mailed to you. And, you know, he broke down the languages into Negro Egyptian, and then Berber, and then Khoisan. So Negro Egyptian is supposed to consist of ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and the Cushitic languages, Chadic, Nilo-Saharan, and Niger-Kordofanian. So really, he still kind of maintains Greenberg's classification, but he puts them all into one group called Negro Egyptian, minus the Afro-Asiatic. So he gets rid of Afro-Asiatic, kicks Semitic out, and Berber is its own family, and but Semitic languages he doesn't consider an African language, right? But so you're going to have to know about, when you're studying African languages, what are the languages and how they are grouped by certain scholars, right? And so then we have Jean-Claude Mboli, also out of the Congo, but the Republic Democratic of Congo. And this is his text, The Origin of African Languages. And, he redoes in Theophilo Benga's Negro Egyptian or Black Egyptian language family and builds it from scratch. And so he calls it Negro Egyptian and Negro Egyptian Post Classic. I've renamed it for various different reasons, and this is my renaming of his groupings. And so I call it Chiankanda, Chikulu meaning ancient. So this is ancient Chiankanda. So Chiankanda is the larger, most ancestral language. So everything belongs to Chiankanda. This is cognate with the word Kemet in ancient Egypt. And then you can further break it down to Chiena Intu and Kabed, and this is what gives us Proto-Semitic once these Africans left out of Africa. But that's another conversation for another time. But then you can see, from the model that we use, these two different branches here, the Bere branch and the Behir branch, that they came from Central East Africa, and the Bere branch, which is this one right here, became the Bantu languages, Zande, Middle Egyptian, Bambara, and Ahasa in Nigeria here. And the Beher branch became the Luo language, Nuer, Wolof in Senegal, Sango in Congo right here, Somali, Coptic, and Zerma, right? And so, so you can't have a discussion about African languages without talking about the nature of relationships and them moving and spreading in their migrations over time, right? And so this is our Chiena Intu organization of the languages. I won't go into that at the moment. That's not relevant. But I've also argued that the Sumerian language, which was over here in Iraq in ancient times, ultimately come from Africa in the same branch as the Middle Egyptian, and Bantu and Hausa derived. And it's more so, we would say, is actually kind of closer to the Mande languages, which will also be over here on this side. And so, but the study of African languages also informs us about Indo-European languages. And Mboli, he in this book here, in the last chapter, he does a preliminary analysis and shows that Proto-Indo-European also derives from African languages in relatively recent history. And so he's coming out with a book in, I believe, March of next year, focusing on that in Semitic languages in relation to Negro Egyptian. And so, but he's not the first to make these connections between Indo-European languages and Niger-Congo, for example, or African languages. So this is GJK Campbell-Dunn, Dr. GJK Campbell-Dunn, and I have a video interview, online interview with this author on my channel, which you can check out as well. But he wrote a book, Comparative Linguistics, Indo-European and Niger-Congo. And I bring this up because, when we're talking about African languages, you may not realize that even the English that you speak, it has traces of the old African tongues. Some of the words that we're using, whether it's from the Latin branch or the Germanic branch, are indigenous African words. And so, when you're teaching these African languages, if you are savvy enough to study historical comparative linguistics and know about Indo-European as well as African languages, you'll be able to show those connections between, for example, Greek and Latin and Niger-Congo languages, or Negro-Egyptian languages, right? So this is even a text here from Melo and Zaitu Hosias, and this is in French, but it's saying that the Bantu roots or the Bantu origins of Latin, right? And so there's many words that you'll find in the Latin languages, like when you speak Spanish or Portuguese or French, that, you know, are in fact indigenous African words. And so there's plenty of text of that. And then here's another text, Comparative Lexical Study of Sumerian and Intu or Bantu languages, Sumerian, the Sanskrit of the African Intu languages. This came out in 1935, and there has been since some texts that support this text, including my latest text, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, which I have a chapter dedicated to the relationship between Bantu and Sumerian, right? And so, like, by understanding certain languages and speaking certain languages, you'll be able to make connections. For example, if we're doing any kind of lessons on the ancient Egyptians, for example, and you're trying to get into the psychology of the ancient Egyptians, and you're studying the words of the ancient Egyptians, you know, you'll be able to go back and forth to a modern African language and find the same concept, and then discuss it within the modern context of that particular language. So, for example, I call the ancient Egyptian language Chikam, and so I'm comparing here two different dialects of Chikam with the Chiluba Bantu language out of Central Africa. So we have this word here meaning, is KM. There is no vowels that are shown here because the ancient Egyptians, to our knowledge, did not write out their vowels. So we have KM, complete, or in verb form, to put an end to. And there's a dialect variant of this, which is Semeru. These are both suffixes on the root, meaning complete, right? This is a nominal. And sorry for the loud noise in the back again. So, and then, but in a Chiluba language, this root is Sula, to be finished, completed, be tired, exhausted. And so we have Kim, profit, to pay. And then we have Isu, because M becomes W, in the word for payment. But in Chiluba, Sela, to pay, the dowry of a wife, Insala, price, right? And so in Chikam A, we're missing a term here for Semer, windpipe, lung, but it's present in Chiluba as Chisulu Sulu, lung. So notice that I'm matching the consonants in each of the languages in the first consonant position. So K corresponds to S, and S corresponds to S in the three languages and dialects here. And M corresponds to M, and M corresponds to L in the second consonant position. So that's what you see over here. So I'm showing what goes together. So KSS, MML. KSS, MWL, because M turns into W intervocally. And then, although we're missing it here, we know that this dialect must have had the word and it disappeared because it's still present in Chiluba. So Chisulu Sulu, lung. And this word Kemet, meaning dorsal fin, is missing in Chikam B, but it's still present in Chiluba. So Musala Sala or Musalala, fin, flipper, right? So the study of African languages can help us to bridge the gap, because in order for this to be able to show these patterns, And we can do this for dozens upon hundreds of words between Egyptian and Chiluba and Bantu in general. This tells us that the ancient Egyptians and the Baluba people, they had to have descended from the same ancestor in order to have inherited all of these same words that just are pronounced differently because languages diverge in terms of pronunciation over time, right? And so even in when it comes to words for human being in person, like the ancient Egyptians, they called themselves remech, and the ch is a suffix on the root. But in Bantu languages, they call themselves Bantu. So that two becomes the R in ancient Egyptian. And there's a whole process I won't go into now. But the form of remech is still present in Chiluba. So the word remech means a man, husband, or a human being. In Coptic, it is pronounced Rome, meaning man or husband. But in Chiluba, it is Lume or Luma, male or masculine. Mulume, husband, man. Chilume, sperm. Right? So understanding these relationships, see, Chiluba is a Chibantu language here that the Bantu and the ancient Egyptian derive from the same ancestral parent. So one of the benefits of studying these languages is that you get a better sense of continuity and camaraderie with other African people, because you understand that they're saying words differently, but they're the same words in this language as in this other languages, right? And so you come to find out that word for person is found all over Africa. Rome, remech. In the New World languages, Ram, Dinka, Ran, Dinka, Lan. In the Beja, Raba. Oromo, the very name Oromo is for man or person is Oromo. In Somali is Lab, meaning he. In Sango, Lo. And of course, Luba and Kikongo, Mulume, Noon, Lome, Inlumi, right? Mulumi, Onomo. So when you go over here for the Dogon, most people think that the word Nomo simply means water or fish, but Nomo actually also means person. Dime, person. Rime, Rime, in these Mandaish type languages, right? These are various different ways to say human being, a person, a man. And even in Sumerian, Dam or Urun. So, in a far language, Numu, Num. These are very important. So when you're talking about the ideas of our great ancestors, I can show you that the ancient Egyptian word ma'at is in the Kikongo language. And so remember, the Bakongo people, many of them were caught up in the transatlantic slave trade. Many of us in the United States have an ancestry with the Bakongo people. So if you want to, learn Kikongo, there are courses out there and places that you can learn Kikongo, and you'll learn the living variant of these ancient words that you find in ancient Egyptian. And so, this word mod, we say mod, but that's not how you pronounce it. Real, true, right, just, fair, correct, proper is in Kikongo lunga, be accurate, right, be exact, perfect. Truth, right, doing righteousness, ma'at, is nlungu, justification, a state of being just, justice, righteousness, blameless, completeness. This is the same root that gives us the name Kalunga, a name for God among the Bakongo people. But that word Kalunga is cognate with the word Ma'at. So they have a variant of this word in the language in Kikongo. So, when we're having these discussions about African languages and the like, and you using these terms, these are the more ancient variations that you find in the hieroglyphs, and these are the modern pronunciations of the same concepts and terms. And so I don't want to take up, I was going to go here because we, not only in terms of language, in terms of voice and speech, but the study of nature is a part of the language learning process. And so this is the book that I was talking about, of Life and Health, by Alexis Tangon, The Language of Art and Religion in an African Medical System. And so he reminds us here, he's talking about broadly the linguistic expressions and their different forms seek to express life as a consciousness that is experienced in different objectified bodies and objectified forms, right? Hence, there is a language independent of the culturally, linguistically constructed human linguistics and languages that humans use to communicate with each other, via which communication between all life forms tend to take place. The special language is embodied and concretized in religion and art. In other words, religion and art constitute the language via which African scientific knowledge is processed, accessed, and understood. Above all, the foundation of this language and the knowledge relates to understanding the process of life transmission, sustenance, and healing. And so this is the language of life. It's a proto-language. So studying these African languages also includes studying nature and how language communicates, expresses itself in that context. So with that said, I end this discussion, and I'm going to have to get out of this place soon. So I have about 5 minutes that I can do question and answer, and we can go from there.
Sounds great. And this has been such an amazing series of lectures. So I just want to thank you again, Brother Asar, for coming and sharing all of your knowledge with us today. I will pick a few questions here from the comments. Let's see. They're also involved. So I'm just going to throw a few of them at you, and you can kind of pick and choose what you want to answer within the 5 minutes that you have. First, we have, what would you point out as one of the major consequences of our diaspora playing a little to no part at all in technological leaps we are currently witnessing, be it AI or aerospace activity? Another question that's here is, which African languages do you recommend? Another question is, can Swahili connect us to the Chicom, Wolof, and others?
So I recommend for study Kiswahili and Yoruba. Chiluba is good as well, but Kiswahili for as the Pan-African language. And yes, it will connect you to ancient Egyptian, like all Bantu languages will connect you to the ancient Egyptian, so, or the Chicam. So, and as far as the first question is concerned, I don't think that we're not part of that process. It's just that we are part of that process in terms of being employees and not owning our own companies. But that's a whole rabbit hole that we would have to go down for why, we don't own those kind of companies, and the amount of money that has been raised and funded for these tech startups that they don't give the Black tech startups. So that's a whole different conversation. But we're there. You may just not know of them, and they're integral to those processes. But as far as like owning the company, owning the Googles and the open AIs and stuff like that, that's a different conversation. Was that it?
Okay, so there's also, should African Americans use Swahili as lingua franca to expedite our development? And someone put more of a comment, who said Africans are not involved in modern technology?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that we are, and it's in different ways, and maybe you have to do a workshop or something like that, highlighting those individuals. And you might want to also join a Facebook page that a few friends and I started called Black Science Month. And you can look it up on Facebook. It's called Black Science Month. And that's all we do is highlight African and Black people in general in the science spaces. And so those who are integral in certain types of technologies and the like, we highlight them as well. So I would recommend joining that. But learning languages will help you learn math better, because you're thinking in terms of symbols. But learning meta nature will help you with math, because you learn to think and see in symbols and comparisons and the like. And so if I had time, I would have gone into that as well. But yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you have any more time, but the only other question that I see here is, should our planning, this is from earlier, should our planning include instances of relocation, reorganization of current government structures, etc.? And this is when you made the statement that the men should have a 200-year plan. Oh, and there's a new question here. Do you know anything about the Kaita clan of West Africa, and is SOY Kaita related?
Dr. Shamarka Keita. Yes, I'm familiar with the Keita clans, but Shamarka Keita, I believe, changed his name. That's not his birth name. So it's just like, Asar Imhotep is not my birth name. And the other question had to deal with the what did you say?
Whether relocation,
the relocation
should be a part of the 200-year plan.
Yes, I mean, there's it shouldn't be the plans. It just depends on what, if at minimum, because asking your family to move to another continent and stuff like that is a bit much. But what you should do is convey it in a way that you're developing land, getting property, and setting up a space for family, for those who want to go, but still set up something as equally here so they can go back and forth. And until, because you got to create a space and a system for them to thrive. You just can't say, what, I'm going to hitch a ride on the next boat and go to Africa and everything's going to be all right. It's a bit more involved than that. But overall, there should be some of us where that is included in their plan to leave the United States and set up shop and integrate into Africa. And the movements and stuff is going on, because that's the future. That's where everything is growing. It is in Africa, and everybody else is wanting a piece of Africa except African Americans, which is crazy. So, but yeah.
Okay, so I know you said that you're out of time. There is one more question that is in the box now. Would you like to take that last question?
I'll take this last question.
Ignore me if this is too unrelated, but I am a computer science major going into programming. Do you have any advice? I'm getting my first tech job.
Ooh, that's been the debate. Or that's been a serious question as late as a result of AI. So if anything, I would definitely get familiar with AI and its processes. And so as as a computer science major, you're taking a lot of math courses and statistics and the like. But again, a step above is, learning language and linguistics, because if the AI, you need more linguists to be programmers so that you can develop software to better do translations. And so, especially if you are a a person who is well versed in African languages, you know, like trying to convey or trying to translate something into English is sometimes it just doesn't equate well in terms of certain concepts. So I would do a concentration or at least some courses in language and linguistics and look into artificial intelligence itself. Um, you know, unless you're going more so on the hardware side, you know, then that's a whole different. I'm more on the programming side of computer science. So on the hardware side, I have nothing off the top of my head, but that's a common discourse. But yeah, so learning how to prompt and becoming, you know, learn to specialize in the prompt engineering, of course, cloud and security. Security is also going to be the thing. And then consider, you know, quantum computing, you know, look into quantum computing and that's one area that, you know, but now you know, you're gonna have to get into some physics, some quantum mechanics and the like. So it's no easy road, but that's it. And I see the question, how do they connect? You can connect with me. I have a website, asarimhotep.com, and my email address is info at asarimhotep.com. And I'm on YouTube, I'm on Facebook. So I have a Facebook account under Asar Imhotep. And that's pretty much where you can, you know, you can find me. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. I'm on TikTok and of course Facebook. So those are the main ones that I frequent. But I appreciate your questions, and again the opportunity to share what little I know in the little time that I was granted. And so I hope that it was valuable to each and every one of you. And then of course, if you have any questions, you want to expand the conversation, just hit me up on one of those sites. So you can, if you hit me up at asarimhotep.com, there's on the contact page, you can send me an email or come directly to me.
Well, I just want to thank you so much again, Brother Asar, for coming and having these 3 lectures with us today about the introduction to Africology for homeschoolers, African-centered teaching methods and pedagogy, and this wonderful lecture that we just had about the power of African languages. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and all of your wisdom. Again, for those who would like to follow Brother Asar, you can go to asarimhotep.com or email him at info@asarimhotep.com, or follow him on Instagram, Facebook, all of those platforms. Thank you again for coming today, everyone, to our Whole Living Academy Kwanzaa community workshops. We will be picking up again tomorrow with 3 more amazing workshops. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel for Whole Living Academy, WHOLE, Whole Living Academy, so that you can be abreast of those workshops starting tomorrow at the same time, 1 p.m. Central Time. And we will also have workshops taking place on Monday. So please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, whichever channels that you're primarily using. We'll be live streaming on all of them. And if you have children pre-K through 12th grade, then please reach out to us for a free 15-minute consultation so that we can help you to select an educational plan that's really going to bring the best out of your children. Happy Kwanzaa, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Peace.